to another edition of Thunderdome!
Welcome to the Mad Max Minute. It's a wonderful day to fly a kite, although local disclaimer, kite flying conditions may vary by location. But first, let's talk about Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome 1 minute at a time. I'm Rick.
And I'm Julia.
We are talking today about minute 60, which begins with Max looking back at a wind chime getting blown around, and it ends with the waiting ones running down a sand dune. Don't let them say their hair's too long, because we don't care. With Sean German and Dave Pallas ending out the week with us, we can't go wrong.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, Julia, Rick, thank you for having us back. We're very excited.
Here at the tail end of the week, we start off. The wind is still blowing, and in this first shot, Max looks behind him at a wind chime that is just being blown about. Now, I call it a wind chime for really lack of better phrasing. It could technically be a mobile or something like that, but the way it's clanging around against its disparate parts, it looks to me like a wind chime. But the important thing about this piece of set dressing is not so much that it's blowing around, but what it's made of. Because if you look at it, those little dangly bits are actually just rounds of ammunition.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Which Max would definitely recognize.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good thing you pointed that out. It's good in the sense that they don't know what it is. You know what I mean? Like any other scavenger would go, ooh, bullets, and then immediately rip them down and load it up. But these kids are so innocent, they see these little metal things as nice things that click together.
Yeah, it makes me, well, it kind of reaches back to some of the things we've talked about earlier in the week in terms of how long have these kids been on their own and how long is it after the apocalypse? Because going by these ages, all but the very oldest of these people they just weren't around when society was. It's 16, 17, maybe 18 years after the events of Mad Max, the first movie. So maybe a couple of the older folks, but were around before the apocalypse, but they certainly wouldn't have any memories. And it must have been quite a long time. I imagine maybe the adults used the firearms, but for safety's sake, at that time, none of the children were old enough to be taught. So they've never used these. So they were never taught what these things are. And the adults have been gone for so long. And like you said, Rick, they've been good. They've been following instructions, and that instruction was just wait. So they haven't experimented or played around or otherwise discovered what these things are, other than little weights to put at the end of strings for your wind chimes.
I imagine that in the first couple of years after the plane crash, when the adults were still around, they probably realized pretty quickly that the ammunition that they had was in very short supply. And so even though the lead hunter among the adults would carry the rifle out on hunts, they would probably be very careful to not burn through that ammunition and resort more to like what we see these kids using, spears and throwing darts and things like that. And so as the years go on, these little bits of ammunition get tied to the end of strings. And sure, the lead hunter is still carrying the gun, but he's doing it in such a way that it's not functioning as a gun. It's more or less a really weighty spear. Although that's a spoiler for 2 weeks from now.
Yeah, and it may be more symbolic now than anything else.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I didn't know that he's carrying a rifle. Interesting.
Slake's walking stick is actually a rifle with just extra stuff strapped to it.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a nice little bit of set dressing that pays off later on.
So I was in the weeds right now until you told me. So are these all children that were survivors of a plane crash?
Yes. So these kids... Their story is basically closely following the apocalypse at some time. Captain Walker and his passengers in a plane are flying. The plane crashes in the middle of the desert. Some of the adults die, some of the adults live, and some of those adults have children. So the adults the survivors from the plane crash find the crack in the earth. They bring all of their kids there and they set up this little society. They start living, they start reproducing. And then eventually the adults are like, hey, camping is great, but it would be nice if we could go back and live in the cities. And so Captain Walker gathers up 20 of the adult survivors, and that's the first great leaving. And over time, more and more adults leave, leaving just them that were birthed, as the kids say, behind to populate this area.
So really, you're making it sound like the first had a real mission when they left, but it sounds like the later adults leaving were kind of like selfish in a way. They were like, I'm out. Like they for some reason, they don't want to be around all these loud kids. And they think, well, these other adults aren't coming back. They must have found somewhere else to live rather than...
Their intentions were a little bit more noble than that.
Well,
more of a, we need to find Captain Walker type of thing.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah.
And I need to get away from all these kids sort of stuff.
Yeah, I don't think Captain Walker went out to get cigarettes and... Just never.
No, I'm saying at least the first trip out, that was the most noble of one. I believe that. But I'm saying is that the other adults abandoning the kids might have been, I don't know. I said I'll have to watch this movie and actually find out for myself. But I was curious if it was like more like I give up kind of thing, and they just like, rather than nihilistically telling the kids nothing means anything, they just like got up and left.
That's a little dark.
It is.
But I also could picture it being that way. We've talked a lot this week about these kids not being corrupted and what a corrupting influence would do to the community. So the adults that were already adults when this happened and experienced, modern society and its corrupting effects, may have had thoughts like that. Like, this is really hard and people have already left and maybe they found something better. So I want to go find something better.
There very well could have been an adult in that group that said, you know what, I think I am going to go out for cigarettes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A single adult, maybe they didn't have a wife or any kids. They were just on that plane. And they're like, I don't want to be the leader of these kids. I just want to go back and see if I could just settle back down.
That brings to mind a funny situation where you've got the one single guy and there are still a bunch of adults left and he's sitting there thinking, I don't want to be the leader of all these kids. And other adult survivors are like, no one asked you to be the leader of all these kids. And he's like, I just don't do well with commitment.
Yeah.
Kids. And everyone's like, no one's asking you to do this. And then he just flies into a fury, packs up a water skin and says, I just need to go find some cigarettes. And he walks out. And everyone's like, where did Jim go? He's been gone for a while. They're like, yeah, but he was also kind of a douche, so.
Cut
that
to Jim in Bartertown.
also makes me wonder if any people that we saw in Bartertown were from that plane crash. Were adults that took a leaving and found Bartertown and made the choice not to go back.
Yeah, that'd be cool if there was like an Easter egg somewhere that you see that like somehow connects them. Yeah.
Because it almost killed Max getting to the crack in the earth.
Yeah.
So the journey from Bartertown to the crack in the earth is very difficult and long enough to almost kill you.
Yeah.
If you're not well supplied.
It's one of those trips where you need to have more than just a single water flask.
Yes.
And it's an arduous journey. Not everybody is going to survive. And if they find Bartertown, they may not think they can go back.
Well, there doesn't seem to be any recognition. Well, I guess they wouldn't. I was just thinking when further down the road, when the small group that ventures out and reaches Bartertown and then escapes Bartertown, we don't see anything from any of those folks that they recognize. Oh, it's those kids that I left out in the crack of the earth. But I guess they see the train leaving, but they maybe the sort of the citizens of Bartertown don't necessarily know who's on board other than they're leaving with Master.
When we first met Pig Killer, we heard his story about, I killed a pig, I had to feed the kids. We thought, what would it be like if he was one of the adults that left the crack in the earth and he tried to steal a pig from Bartertown to bring back to the crack in the earth to feed the kids. And we thought it was, just a little too much. Like, it was a little too much of a connection. We saw it more of him being delusional, imagining a family that he had to feed.
Yeah.
But that would probably be that similar type of thing. An adult from the crack in the earth takes a leaving, finds Bartertown somehow, and then just gets roped up into the economical intrigues of the space and gets trapped in some sort of indentured servitude and cannot go back.
I think that's very plausible.
I'm going to say, once again, hypothetically, I'm just going to throw this one out. Maybe the origins of Bartertown was some of the survivors, and then we talk about the corruption, and just those people either they left that Bartertown or they got killed off, and then, this new darkness kind of took over.
Yeah, I really want a Bartertown Origins movie starring a stand-in for a young Tina Turner, and you can cast someone to be, young Master and young Blaster, and throw Dr. Dealgood and the Collector in there, really give some solid backstory to Bartertown, because it is a very interesting concept. The idea of a woman who was nobody before the apocalypse suddenly rising to such prominence that she can become the leader of a wasteland settlement that's actually pretty stable.
Yeah.
With, a few nitpicky little things.
All things considered, yeah.
Maybe a Zoe Saldana or someone like that for Auntie. I think there's certainly a great tale there to be told. And I want to know, one of my favorite characters in this movie is Iron Bar. Like, I want to know his deal. What's his backstory? Because he is nigh invincible. We see he has brushes with death every 10 minutes or so in this movie and keeps coming back. So there's certainly a mythology there to be mined.
There is quite a group of interesting characters, especially in Bartertown, that, backstory would be so much fun. I'd be happy with a graphic novel. Like they did between this movie and the next, before Fury Road, they did a series of graphic novels, kind of getting us to the point of Fury Road.
Yeah, because the Mad Max game, as fun as it was, really felt like its own thing again. Like, they only dropped like a few hints of the Fury Road mythology kind of near the end.
Yeah. Since I discovered the comics, I have very mixed feelings about the story of the Mad Max 2015 video game. I love the gameplay. Yeah. And I love how it all works. But the story itself, I try to keep myself distanced from. There's just something about when you fire up a Mad Max game and they begin with a flashback to him before the collapse, and it shows him swimming in a swimming pool with his wife and daughter. And I'm like, okay, first of all, Max never owned a swimming pool.
Yeah.
He and Jesse rented what was essentially a loft apartment.
Yeah.
And he also didn't have a daughter. He had a son. Like, come on, Avalanche, get it right. For all of those Avalanche employees that worked on the Mad Max video game and actually listen to this podcast, there's probably just a ton of crossover, and I don't know.
I mean, I still like, it was nice that game. The game still was fun. Like, I always like, it could have came off as like, some multiplayer game that could have like been dead before it even started. A lot of companies would do that. Like, just apocalyptic server, and everyone just runs around and makes their own madness.
You know what? Now that you brought it up, that gets me thinking. There is such a explosion lately of these battle royale style games where you've got 1 against 99, just everybody fighting each other. What we need is a battle royale mode in a post-apocalyptic themed game where you have 2 teams. 1 team of raiders, 1 team of survivors, and the survivors defend a tanker, and you basically get to recreate that end scene of Road Warrior. Like, that is a niche that has not been filled.
Yeah. And I know those battle royale games. It's pretty much as you could tell at times where it's like it's a cheap to make. They just make a big map and then they just randomly spawn items and then the players make their own gameplay. So for a developer, as long as you make sure the servers run well, that all like 100 people when it first starts up run around right, the game pretty much plays itself. And it's an addicting mentality. If you want to get the chicken dinner, you want to keep playing, you want to keep. And then Fortnite has that whole crafting thing. But yeah, it's I played a lot of them. And I kind of fell out because it got to the point where you're like, you're gonna lose more than you're gonna win. And there's always so many like close call stories you can have before you get bored. But yeah, I like the idea of like having a game like that, but you have like a third act that's different. It's not just 2 people waiting in the bushes for 1 guy to move. There's something more to do. So yeah, I would like that. More of a team mechanic on defending, attacking, and you're moving across this. You have a huge map. Now you got to drive across it. Yeah.
Now, speaking of something like PUBG or Fortnite, where you start the game by parachuting or gliding your way in. This next shot of the minute that we see is the wind whipping up and catching Mr. Skyfish's kite, which pulls it up off the platform it's sitting on. And the hat being caught up by the wind in minute 58 was significant, but the fact that Mr. Skyfish's giant bird-shaped kite starts to rise as well, well, that's serious.
Yeah.
Because in the next shot, we see Mr. Skyfish step forward and he's looking at it. The kite lifts up even higher and higher, and then he shouts with all of his childlike exuberance, "This is it."
It's like they're seeing a sign that they've been waiting for.
Yeah, that was exactly my note, that this is something they've been waiting for, and they all know how to react. That they are, well, we don't know quite where they're going, but they're all going somewhere. And it isn't like word, it seems like word doesn't need to spread. No one has to say, well, obviously we say, oh, it's time to go. But they all know where they're going. They all know what that means. It doesn't take a lot of convincing to get the whole horde, everyone heading up those ladders and over the ridge.
Earlier this week, Slake said, "We're ready. Let's go."
Yeah.
And he really meant it. They were ready to go at a moment's notice. They got their moment and they ran.
This is us Phillies fans at the Super Bowl, This was it. The birds are going up, baby. Get the mummers, we're going.
And the music in this minute is spectacular.
Yeah, the swell.
It's so meaningful, and it has a real presence that really elevates what's happening here. And you're reminded that the composer, he also did the composing for movies like Lawrence of Arabia.
Yeah.
So you really see the connection here, where he's doing these big grand pieces that have a lot of meaning behind them and really participate in telling the story.
Yeah, so this music, this made me think of Nino Rota.
I knew you were going to say it.
Yeah.
I knew it.
Dave, you know me too well, but he's another movie composer who worked with Fellini a lot, and then also worked on The Godfather and The Godfather 2 and stuff. But the horns and the cymbals, and it has a very march feeling, but it's not like a Sousa march, but there's definitely a pace to kind of, we're moving now.
Going.
This is, it gets us going. And that's what it made me think about.
This is classic Maurice Jarre.
Yeah, classic Maurice. Exactly.
Wait, right there at second 27, Scrooloose touches Max's shoulder. Now, does Scrooloose talk a lot, or is he a quiet type?
All right. I don't think Scrooloose ever talks in this movie. In fact, I like that you brought up the fact that he jumps down from his ledge and touches Max on the shoulder, because up to this point, Scrooloose has very purposely been very hands-off with everybody around him. He has never, before this moment, purposely made contact with another individual. In fact, he was on his lonesome when they first arrived with Max. When he found himself suddenly surrounded by other children, he immediately removed himself.
Interesting.
So the fact that he's willing to reach out to Max and just touch him, even for a moment, it shows Max's significance to the tribe children.
Yeah, that's a big thank you for this kind of meaning behind it, that he's so inspired that he's going to join with everyone running outside.
So as all of these kids are running up and out of the crack in the earth, they're all going up this one ladder through this one opening, which must lead up into the sands. We're getting a nice sense of where everything is. Savannah can be seen helping one of the smaller children, this is Eddie, up the rocks. But Eddie lets go of Savannah's hand and comes back and grabs Max to pull him along, because Max isn't moving fast enough to keep up with the rest of the kids.
Yeah, I mean, now he's kind of like sullen. He's like, oh no, they're leaving the safety. It's like there's no way to wrangle these kids back into this crack because now they see the wind. They think it's time to run, baby. We gotta go.
Yeah.
It's like,
well,
no.
They do kind of quickly for how much this was their savior returned for the last 2 minutes. This gust of wind comes through. Well, I guess it's a little more of a gust, but the wind comes. They see that as a sign, and all of a sudden, they've, for the most part, forgotten Max. They're going on to whatever they do.
Yeah, they leave him behind in order to run off. And Max starts following them, I would say, out of curiosity. Like, where are all these kids going?
Yeah. Well, and that's how I interpreted that hand on the shoulder from Scrooloose. Is, he's not a very demonstrative guy, but that's him saying, come on, let's go. Like, this is exciting. Stuff is happening. You know, that's as excited as Scrooloose gets, it seems.
Come, Captain Walker, let us run the hilly brush.
Exactly. That's exactly what he's saying with that hand on the shoulder. And this place empties out.
I'm very curious to see what are they looking at, you know? If we turn the camera around, what would we see? Like, would we just see, a big wasteland of desert? Like, it's,
We know that Gecko is in a leg brace, that he walks slow. Mm-hmm. So I'm wondering how he managed to get out of the crevice at the same pace as everybody else.
It's an interesting thing. As we transition out of the crack in the earth into the dune scene, you can get a really good look at all of these tribe kids running down this dune. The only one that seems to be infirm as he's running is there's one kid in an arm sling, keeping his arm stationary. Gecko's sonic stick thing is being carried by Anagoena. I don't see Gecko anywhere in this running group. And yet, as we're going to see next week, Gecko is there on the plane already. So not only did Gecko get out of the crack in the earth before everybody, he got down the dune, across the way, and to their destination before everybody else as well.
Well, that's quite a feat.
Especially for someone with a bum leg.
Yep.
Well, he must have had help. I mean, they're a close-knit community. They stick together. They help each other out.
That's got to be it. There's no other way it could have worked.
Yeah.
So for there supposedly being 50 some odd kids in this group, I'm looking at this giant crew running along, and I only really see about 35.
I'm a little bit torn because you look at the number 52 and you're like, oh, that's a lot of kids. I don't blame them for not doing 52 kids. But at the same time, 30 is a lot of kids.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's almost like you might as well go full throttle and get 52 kids.
What's another 20?
Yeah, at that point.
I feel like they didn't plan on people freezing the frame and counting the children.
Yeah. Hold on, I need to count.
This is a common problem that people who do movies by the minute run into. Those little instances where you know for a fact, not having it confirmed, but you know in your gut, that the movie maker never intended for that particular shot to be looked at that closely.
Yeah.
There was no way that Miller and Ogilvy were like, okay, we need to have Gecko on the plane when they get to it, but we don't want to have him hobbling down the sand dune. Oh, well, we'll just pull him out of the shot. No one's going to notice. Yeah. That's where they're wrong. Because we noticed 30 some odd years later.
You really do get to see the green as we go up. You get to see the green tree canopies. And, you're like, this is beautiful. This is honestly beautiful. You got trees, you got green. And then it just transitions to, wasteland dune. You're like, no, there's nothing out there.
The drastic change between biomes, between the first shot and the second shot, is deeply worrying. Like, there is such a night and day difference between lots of water, lots of vegetation, and then suddenly sand dunes. Like, these two things, you don't feel like they should be butting up against each other, but they more or less are.
Yeah, and that just emphasizes the point that Max is trying to make. There's nothing out there. You're better off staying where you are. In fact, the people out there, if they knew this was here, they'd be fighting to get in.
Yeah, I don't know exactly where they say it, but they do say it somewhere either in the storybook or the novelization or the movie. But the waiting ones refer to these sand dunes as the nothing, because there's nothing out there. And it's also slowly consuming Fantasia, and if Bastian doesn't name the unnamed princess or queen or whatever it is, all of Fantasia's going to disappear.
We can't have that now.
Nope.
No, so Slake needs to cry out the name of his mother.
Just as long as it's not Moonchild.
It's Joanna. That's a normal name.
Joanna the fire tender. Yep. So this last scene, the fade happens right around second 48. This scene is more or less the entirety of next week's minute.
Yep.
So I don't know what we're going to do. I really don't like.
We'll figure it out. We always do.
We're going to figure out. We always find some way to turn the desolate into a blooming oasis.
Yeah.
Now, Sean, you've seen this movie multiple times.
I have.
Were you one of those people that rented it on home video, or what's your history with this movie?
I believe I saw this movie in the theater. I don't have any hard memories because It's been a while. It's been a few years, but I would have been right around the right age. I was certainly familiar with the franchise. I saw the second movie, Road Warrior, would have been the first that I became aware of Max and his madness. And I would have been of the right age to be going to the movies by myself with friends, maybe not driving, but old enough for a parent to drop us off at the theater so that we can then see this movie. And so, yeah, I have a feeling, I think I saw it in the theater, certainly saw it many, many times on home video, either renting it, probably taped it off of HBO at some point and had that tape worn out. I'm a big fan. I love this movie. I think it's great. And this would have been my go-to for those sort of junior high and high school years. I was a big fan of Star Wars, although after Jedi, there was that long period of time where there were no new Star Wars movies, which at the time we thought was bad. And then we got new Star Wars movies, and be careful what you wish for. But
Yes.
so I was a big Star Wars fan from when I was age appropriate to play with the toys. They really sucked me in with the merchandising. So 78 through 83, big Star Wars time for me. I liked Raiders. I was a big fan of Raiders, but not so much of the other movies in that series. So those wouldn't be things that I'd be watching over and over again and constantly talking about with my friends. In terms of series and trilogies that we would be watching over and over again and we would be discussing, for my formative movie years, it would have been this series, these three movies, the first three of Mad Max, Road Warrior, and then particularly this one, Beyond Thunderdome, that me and my friends would watch over and over again, and that I'm a particular fan of. And one of the things that we learn doing this process, this movie by minutes process, is one thing: we find mistakes, we find continuity errors, we find questions that we don't have answers to. And then we also find that there are things that people don't like. And that's kind of one of the things I'm learning that I didn't realize going back, that this movie isn't as popular with the general fandom as it is with me and my friends. And maybe part of that is the lack of vehicles. That's certainly a major part of those first two movies, the various vehicles that Max and his comrades, that the other MFP officers, and then the gangs and whatnot. Until the final scene, really like the last half hour or so, vehicles don't really play a huge part in this movie, which is a break from the previous two. But I wasn't a big car guy, kind of quote unquote, as a teenager, and certainly not around the time when this came out. So that was not one of my concerns, was not a negative for me. It was just, this one's a little bit different from the other ones. But I like it. And I also like the optimism. I think this is the most optimistic of those first three movies. And you guys have said it, Rick and Julia, early on when you were just kind of introducing, I think mostly when you're talking during those during the opening credits and just kind of talking generally about the movie, you make a point to say there really isn't a bad guy. That the folks in Bartertown and Auntie and Master Blaster, they may have different goals that diverge from Max and other people. You know, they have their own thing going on that doesn't always line up with what Max wants and his goals. But it's not bad. Yeah. It's not a democracy, but they've got rules. And everyone follows the rules. Master Blaster follows the rules. Auntie even is not above the law. So they've got a system that works for them, just like, these folks in The Crack in the Earth, they've got a system that seems to be working for them. They're different people with different goals, but there isn't a bad guy. There isn't a Lord Humongous. There isn't a toe cutter. Right. There's no one like that in this movie.
Yeah, I love the inherent optimism of a post-apocalyptic movie. The idea that even though everything has been destroyed, humanity lives on in some form or another. Yeah. Speaking of humanity in some form living on, Dave, where you've watched particularly just Fury Road, and now you've come back to watch these 3 minutes of Thunderdome, where is your interest level? Are you going to run out and watch all of Thunderdome? Do you think you'll try and watch some of the first movies in the trilogy. Where are you at this point?
Yeah, I don't think there's any downside to just starting with Mad Max, go to Road Warrior, go to this. I don't know what my opinions are going to be of each of the three films. But the reason I wanted to watch Fury Road, the reason I went was probably when you saw those trailers, like the effects look so good that it's like from a technical standpoint, I have to see it because it looks like we have a great mix of real vehicles. We have this great CGI of storms. It was kind of a thing where I felt like it welcomed me in the fact that like, hey, don't worry if you didn't see the other ones. You can work with this. And I was like, okay, cool. And yeah, it was a great film. It was probably one of the top 5 films of 2015. Because I remember 2015 being a really good movie year. Because that was probably up there. It was probably like 1 or 2. Because I think I got my parents to watch it, and they were like, "Wow, yeah." It was like wow, like my parents are just being old people, and they were like, "No, this is good. This is good." And I think this probably was. Might have been number 1 probably until Sicario, and then I think it became number 2 because Sicario was like that was a movie that like talked to me, and I still watch that movie a lot. But yeah, like I felt really comfortable like being like kind of walking in not knowing anything about it and having a good time with it. And yeah, I have friends who watch the original ones, and I actually kind of texted my one friend today saying that, hey, I want a podcast about Beyond the Thunderdome. I really haven't seen any of the original ones. He's like, I don't even like that one. I said, well, all right, well, I'm gonna give it. I'm gonna give it. I'm gonna give it a chance. Yeah. It could be the same reason that certain people don't like certain sequels, where it's like it doesn't feel like, in their opinion, it keeps like integrity of the character, or yeah, maybe it was. Maybe they wanted more car chase, and that's why they really loved Fury Road. They get to see that same visceral car chase of Road Warrior.
Yeah, there are definitely worse third entries in a series. I mean, Thunderdome is streets ahead better than Superman 3.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, certainly. Yeah. Well, I'm
trying to think if I've even seen Superman. I'm honestly thinking, I don't think
Superman 3 is the one with Richard Pryor.
Yeah.
Who is the computer hacker.
I see clips. Yeah. Yeah, I see clips. No, I've not
it's
seen
the Office Space of the Superman franchise. But I think you make a very good point, Dave. And one of the particular things why I like this series of movies so much is when you talked about, well, you just go in Fury Road and it seems like it'll stand apart well, and you weren't worried about not having seen the previous films. And I think all these movies work very well on their own. I came in the middle. I saw Road Warrior was my first, and I think that got big in America. And then later they brought Mad Max over to say, hey, there's this other movie that came before, but they all stand alone. This works out really well. And in particular, this scene, talking, Dave, you've only seen this bit. You haven't seen the whole movie. And you can watch this and enjoy it and think about the relationship that Max would have, this loner coming out of the desert and coming upon this sort of encampment around this oasis with these children. And that's fine, and that's entertaining, and you think about it and discuss it and so forth, and not even know, Max had a family of his own at some point, and he had a son, and he had the interaction with the feral child in the other movie, that the layers are there for those that recognize it and can appreciate it. And if you miss it, you don't know that you're missing it. There's enough there that it does stand alone. And then if you have seen the other movies and you put it in context of the greater story and the whole world, then it's even better. But these movies, I think, in terms of sequels, they stand alone so well. The quality of the entertainment and the production and the writing and everything as standalone movies, much better than a lot of other sequels and a lot of other series. And then I think I said this Monday, but again, Dave, if you go back and you watch those other movies, the first 3, that you will like Fury Road even more than you do now.
Yeah, there's no downside to that. Okay.
Yeah.
I kind of see the Mad Max movies very much like the Sergio Leone Clint Eastwood movies. Like, you don't necessarily need to know who Clint Eastwood is at the beginning of each one of those movies. But if you've seen the previous movies that Sergio Leone and Clint Eastwood did together, it colors the character as he's walking into this new story.
Okay.
Very much like that.
What's the word? I mean, what is the word on, they talked about, get Tom Hardy and Charlize Theron and doing some kind of, keeping the iron hot and doing another one. Is there any new updates on that? As of 3 years later?
The latest news that we haven't really gotten any updates for revolves around a lawsuit between Miller and Warner Brothers. Basically, there's a he said, she said situation about a bonus and completing the film on time and under budget versus being pushed into overtime by reshoots. And it's a very sticky situation that we definitely are not experts on.
Okay.
We've mentioned it in the past and we've discussed it several times, and we probably don't want to say too much. We don't want to comment on a case that's still ongoing.
Oh, so, I mean, yeah, that's what stings. It's, he reinvigorated the franchise, really. And clearly there's some contract stuff that, the lawyers have got to get involved and let's slow things down. That's a shame.
Yeah, that's Hollywood, all right. But here at the end of the week, Dave and Sean, do you guys have any plugs that you want to share with our listeners?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going to give you this one. You might have already heard about it, but for someone who is interested, we were talking about video games, I think an interesting apocalyptic video game to play. It's a little bit smarter than just a battle royale. It just came out on Steam. I think it's just for the PC. It's called Frostpunk. Mm-hmm. And the short of it is you have a wasteland of just frozen earth, and you are considered the leader of the last remnants of civilization that you know about. And you're essentially in a crack in the earth, like literally it's a giant cavern, and like almost like a meteor crater. That's what it looks like. You essentially have the train that you use to supply everyone. You've built it into a heat engine, and now you have to essentially play city builder, keeping people from freezing to death. Huh. And it's essentially just go from sand to just temperature, and you have to deal with winds, you have to deal with hunting, you start to deal with jobs and stuff, where you're gonna put bodies. It's it really is like you lose a lot. And what's great is you don't lose in the sense that like the city dies, you lose in the sense that you're voted out. And then the story ends with you leaving the crater and just people talking shit about you. Like, we'll be better off without him. And you're like, I hope so, because I'm definitely going to die out here in the wilderness. I hope you don't. So it really, you get to play the politics of having these moral questions asked to you with the trying to keep a civilization warm and see if you can try and rebuild. So
nice.
Yeah, that's my official plug. And then 5 minutes of mystery. I talk about Mystery Men, Groundhog Day, Groundhog Minute. We talk about Groundhog Day, the usuals. But I wanted to plug something a little bit more, closer to what you're working with.
Nice. Sean?
Yeah, sure. I'll go with that. Yeah, so the Groundhog Minute, the 5 minutes of mystery, the 5 minutes of mime, you can go back. There's the back catalog. Last year I did Spinal Tap Minute, covering the movie This Is Spinal Tap with a great co-host Heidi Bennett. And Heidi went on to do Cabin Minute Cast, covering the movie Cabin in the Woods. So if you haven't listened to any of those podcasts and you're interested in those movies, those are good things to check out. And of course, we want to thank you, Rick and Julia, for being our hosts and having us around this week.
Yes, thank you.
It's been a lot of fun.
Oh, you are very welcome. Thank you for joining us. As for our regular listeners, we are going to put a pin in these kids running down a dune. Next Monday, we're going to get to see the sky raft that all of the waiting ones are so proud of. And that's about it, to tell the truth. So I will stop talking about the regular show, transition over into our weekend show like I like to do. We are in week 20 of our Patreon show, Anarchy Road. This week on Anarchy Road, we're going to see Peter. His memories are flooding back to him. So not only does he remember his prior adventures with Wendy and the boys, but he also remembers his origin story, which chronicles Gwyneth Paltrow's slow transformation into Maggie Smith. And there's also a bit about Peter marrying Moira and then starting a family and blah, 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 blah. But there'll be plenty of time to talk about that when we're on Patreon there. So $3 a month. Come join us and listen to that. Otherwise, we'll just see you on Monday.
The Mad Max Minute podcast is a fan project by Rick and Julia Ingham.
The Mad Max franchise was created by George Miller and Byron Kennedy, is presented by Kennedy Miller Mitchell Productions, and distributed by Warner Brothers.
Mad Max Minute is produced and edited by Rick Ingham. Our opening music is Verdi's Dies Irae by Daniel Batista of danielbatista.com. And our outro music is We Don't Need Another Hero by MilitiaVox of militiavox.com.
Our home on the internet is madmaxminute.com. You can follow us on Twitter at madmaxminute, like us on Facebook by searching for Mad Max Minute, and join our Facebook listener group, Mad Max Minute Beyond Microphone.
If you'd like to support the podcast, visit madmaxminute.com, where you can check out our TeePublic storefront by clicking the store link, join our Patreon by clicking the support link, or make a one-time donation by clicking the donate link.
Thank you for joining us for minute 60 of Beyond Thunderdome. We'll see you next time.
Everybody